The saloon doors swung open with a violence that made every man at the card table look up. But Zelda Calloway kept her eyes on her hand. 5 cards that held either her future or her ruin. The year was 1878, and San Antonio, Texas, had a way of testing everyone who passed through its dusty streets. But tonight the test belonged to her alone. She had ridden into town 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on her back, a leather satchel containing her mother's wedding ring, and a reputation for cards that had followed her all the way from Louisiana. Her father had taught her to play before he died, back when she was barely old enough to hold the cards without dropping them. Now at 22, those lessons were all she had left of him, and they were about to either save her or destroy her completely. The man across from her was named Trent Carson, and he owned half the ranch land within 50 miles of San Antonio. He was 26, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar despite his obvious attempts to tame it. His eyes were the color of amber whiskey, and right now they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the cards. "Your bet, miss," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. Zelda glanced at the pile of money in the center of the table. She had already bet everything she owned, which admittedly was not much. The other 3 players had folded minutes ago, sensing the tension between her and Trent, had transformed this from a friendly game into something far more dangerous. "I have nothing left to bet," she said calmly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Trent leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and solid in the way of men who spent their lives working land and cattle. "Then I suppose you are out," he said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he did not want the game to end, not yet. "Unless," Zelda said slowly, an idea forming even as she spoke, "you would be willing to extend credit." A murmur went through the crowd that had gathered around their table. Credit in a poker game was dangerous business, the kind of thing that led to debts that could never be repaid. Trent studied her for a long moment. "What kind of collateral are you offering, my word?" Zelda said firmly. "If I lose, I will work off whatever I owe you, 1 month of labor for every $100. Someone behind her whistled low. At the current pot, that would mean years of servitude. But Zelda knew her hand, and more importantly, she knew Trent was bluffing. She had been watching him all night, learning the tiny tells that gave him away. The way his jaw tightened when he had something good. The way his fingers drummed once against the table when he was uncertain. Right now, his hands were perfectly still, but his shoulders were tense in a way they had not been all evening. "That is quite an offer," Trent said softly, "but I am not looking for hired help." "Then what do you want?" The question came out more boldly than she intended, and heat rose to her cheeks. Trent's eyes darkened. For a moment she thought he might say something that would scandalize the entire saloon, but instead he glanced down at his cards and then back up at her. "Tell you what. I will raise you Thunder." The entire room went silent. Thunder was Trent Carson's prize stallion, a magnificent black horse that was legendary throughout Texas. Men had offered him thousands of dollars for that animal, and he had turned them all down. The horse was worth more than everything on the table combined, worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. "You cannot be serious," Zelda breathed. "I am always serious when it comes to poker," Trent replied. "And I am serious about this. You match my bet with your promise of labor, and if you win, Thunder is yours. If I win, you work for me until the debt is paid. Do we have a deal?" Zelda should have walked away. Every sensible bone in her body screamed at her to fold, to leave with what little dignity she had left. But she looked at her cards again, at the full house that sat in her hand like a gift from God himself, and she heard her father's voice in her head. "Never back down when you know you have got them beat, Zelda girl." "Deal," she said. She laid down her cards one by one. 10 of hearts, 10 of diamonds, 10 of spades, king of hearts, king of clubs, full house, tens over kings. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. It was a strong hand, the kind that won most games. Zelda allowed herself a small smile as she reached for the pot. "Not so fast," Trent said quietly. He laid down his own cards with deliberate slowness. 4 queens and a 3 of diamonds, 4 of a kind. The smile died on Zelda's lips. The room spun slightly, and she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. She had been so certain, so absolutely convinced that she had read him correctly. But she had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, and now she owed this man a debt she could never repay. "Well," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her world crumbled around her, "I suppose I will be seeing a lot more of you, Mr. Carson." Trent gathered his winnings slowly, his expression unreadable. "I suppose you will." He stood, pulling on his hat. "Be at my ranch at dawn tomorrow. 5 miles north of town, you cannot miss it. Ask anyone for directions to the Carson place." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. The saloon had returned to its normal noise level, but in the space between them, everything was quiet and still. "You played a good game tonight," he said. "Best I have had in years." Then he was gone, pushing through the crowd and disappearing into the night, leaving Zelda alone with the wreckage of her pride and the dawning realization that she had just gambled away her freedom to a man she did not know. She did not sleep that night. How could she? Instead, she lay in the tiny room she had rented above the general store, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how her life had gone so wrong. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and without her father's protection, Zelda had discovered quickly that the world had little use for a woman alone. She had bounced from town to town, using her card skills to earn enough money to survive, always staying one step ahead of trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had finally caught up with her. As the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, Zelda rose and dressed in the only outfit she owned that was suitable for ranch work. The dress was faded blue calico, worn at the hem and patched at the elbows, but it was sturdy. She braided her long auburn hair and pinned it up, then splashed cold water on her face from the basin on her dresser. In the mirror, her green eyes looked back at her, tired but defiant. "You have survived worse," she told her reflection, though she was not entirely sure that was true. The walk to the Carson ranch took her over an hour. The sun was just clearing the horizon when she finally saw the property spread out before her, and despite everything, she could not help but be impressed. The main house was large and well-maintained, painted white with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Behind it were several barns and outbuildings, all in good repair. Horses grazed in a pasture to the east, and she could see cattle dotting the distant hills. This was not the property of some small-time rancher. This was an empire. She found Trent in one of the barns, brushing down a chestnut mare. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. "You came," he said. "Did you think I would not?" Zelda asked, lifting her chin. "I pay my debts, Mr. Carson." "Trent," he corrected. "If you are going to be working here, we might as well drop the formalities." He set down the brush and stepped out of the stall, closing it behind him. In the confined space of the barn, he seemed even larger than he had in the saloon. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Cook?" "Well enough to keep from starving." "Handle cattle?" Zelda hesitated. "I can learn." Trent studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, come with me." He led her through the property, pointing out the various buildings and explaining the routine of the ranch. There were 15 men who worked for him, he told her, and an older woman named Maria who handled the cooking and cleaning for the main house. Zelda would be helping Maria and also working with the horses, which needed constant care and training. "I do not run a charity," Trent said as they walked. "Everyone here earns their keep. You will work 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. Sundays you can have to yourself. You will eat with the ranch hands and sleep in the small cabin behind the main house. It is not much, but it is clean and weatherproof." "And how long until my debt is paid?" Zelda asked. Trent stopped walking and turned to face her. "You owed me approximately $2,000 based on last night's pot. At fair wages for the work you will be doing, I would say about 5 years. 5 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. 5 years of her life, gone because of one bad hand of cards. "Unless," Trent continued, his voice careful, "you had another way to settle the debt." Zelda's eyes narrowed. "I am not that kind of woman, Mr. Carson." "Trent," he corrected again, "and that is not what I was suggesting." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable for the first time since she had met him. "Look, I do not need another ranch hand if I am being honest. I have got more than enough, but I do need someone with a good head for numbers. Someone who can keep books, manage accounts, deal with the cattle buyers when they come through. My father handled all that before he died last year, and I have been making a mess of it ever since." "You want me to be your bookkeeper?" Zelda asked, surprised. "I watched you last night," Trent said. "The way you calculated odds, kept track of cards, managed your bets even when you were down to nothing. That takes a sharp mind. So yes, if you can do that, if you can help me turn this ranch's finances from a disaster into something manageable, then I would say we could settle your debt in a year. Maybe less." It was a generous offer, far more generous than she had any right to expect. Zelda searched his face for some sign of deception, some hint of ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you being kind to me?" Trent's jaw tightened, that tell she had learned last night. "Because I saw something in you yesterday. Before the game, I mean. You walked into that saloon like you owned it, even though your dress was patched and your boots were worn through. You sat down at a table full of men who wanted you gone, and you played with more courage than any of them had in their whole bodies." He paused, looking away. "Reminded me of someone." "Who?" "My sister," Trent said quietly. "She died 3 years ago, cholera. She had that same fire in her, that same refusal to let the world tell her what she could and could not do." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. "Anyway, that is why. Do you want the bookkeeper job or not?" "Yes," Zelda said without hesitation. "Yes, I do." "Good. Maria will show you to your cabin and get you settled. We will start going over the books tomorrow morning." He turned to leave, then stopped. "And Zelda, welcome to the Carson Ranch." The cabin was small but comfortable, with a bed, a table, a chair, and a small stove for cooking. Someone had left fresh linens on the bed, and a pitcher of water on the table. Zelda set down her satchel and sat heavily on the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She had lost everything in a poker game. She had become indentured to a stranger. And somehow, impossibly, she had also been given a chance at something better than she had had in years. The next morning, Trent was waiting for her on the porch of the main house with a stack of ledgers that looked like they had been through a war. Papers were shoved between pages, notes were scribbled in margins, and the math was so tangled that Zelda felt a headache coming on just looking at it. "This is the mess?" she asked. "This is the mess," Trent confirmed, looking sheepish. "I am a fair hand with cattle and horses, but numbers have never been my strength." Zelda rolled up her sleeves. "Well, let us see what we can do." They worked together all morning. Trent explaining the various transactions and business dealings while Zelda sorted through the chaos and began organizing it into something comprehensible. She discovered quickly that the ranch was actually more profitable than Trent realized. He had been undercharging for his cattle and overpaying for supplies because he did not know how to negotiate or keep proper track of market prices. "You have been getting robbed blind," she told him bluntly around noon, pointing to a series of invoices from a supplier in San Antonio. "These prices are at least 30% higher than they should be." Trent leaned over her shoulder to look, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. Her pulse quickened traitorously. "How do you know that?" he asked. "My father was a merchant before he died," Zelda explained, trying to focus on the numbers and not on Trent's proximity. "I grew up around invoice sheets and price negotiations. This supplier is taking advantage of you because you do not know any better. Can you fix it?" "I can do better than that. I can find you better suppliers and negotiate contracts that will save you thousands." She turned her head to look at him and found his face inches from hers. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Trent cleared his throat and stepped back. "That would be good. That would be very good." The days began to blur together in a rhythm that Zelda found surprisingly pleasant. She spent her mornings working on the ranch's books, slowly transforming the chaotic mess into organized, accurate records. Her afternoons were spent learning other aspects of ranch life. Maria taught her to cook proper meals for the crew. One of the ranch hands, an older man named Pete, taught her to rope and brand cattle. And Trent himself taught her to ride better than she ever had before, starting with gentle mares and gradually working up to horses with more spirit. "You have got natural seat," he told her one afternoon, as she guided a spirited bay gelding through a series of turns in the corral. "Most people tense up when a horse gets frisky, but you stay relaxed. The horse can feel that." "My father used to say fear is contagious," Zelda replied, bringing the gelding to a smooth stop. "But so is confidence. Smart man, your father, he was." Zelda dismounted and patted the gelding's neck. "He died when I was 19, killed in a robbery at his store." "I am sorry," Trent said, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. "It was a long time ago." She handed him the reins. "What about your parents?" "You mentioned your father died, but what about your mother?" Trent's expression shuddered. "She passed when I was 15. Same cholera outbreak that took my sister years later. After my father died last year, it was just me trying to keep this place running." "You have done well," Zelda said softly. "Your father would be proud." Something warm flickered in Trent's eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the weeks turned into months, Zelda found herself settling into ranch life in ways she had never expected. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she belonged somewhere. The ranch hands accepted her after she proved she was willing to work as hard as they did. Maria became like a mother to her, teaching her family recipes and telling her stories about Trent's childhood that made him blush when Zelda brought them up later. And Trent himself had become something she could not quite define. They worked together every day, their initial wariness gradually giving way to an easy companionship. He made her laugh with dry observations about the cattle buyers who tried to cheat him. She made him laugh by reading aloud the most ridiculous entries from his old ledgers. They argued about everything from the best way to break a horse to whether biscuits were better with butter or honey, and somehow those arguments never felt hostile, only energizing. But there were other moments too, quieter ones that made her heart race and her breath catch. The way his hand would brush hers when he passed her a coffee cup. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression soft and almost wondering. The way her stomach flipped whenever he smiled at her, really smiled. Not the polite social smile he gave everyone else, but the genuine one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. She was falling for him. Zelda realized one evening as she watched the sunset from her cabin's porch. Falling hard and fast and utterly without permission from her logical mind, which kept reminding her that she was essentially his employee, his debtor, and that any feelings between them were impossibly complicated. But her heart, it seemed, did not care about complications. It was a Saturday evening in late September, about 4 months after she had arrived at the ranch, when everything changed. Trent had ridden into town earlier that day to meet with a potential cattle buyer, and he returned just as the sun was setting, looking troubled. "What is wrong?" Zelda asked, meeting him at the stable where he was unsaddling his horse. "The buyer backed out," Trent said, his voice tight with frustration. "Said he found cheaper cattle in New Mexico. I needed that sale, Zelda. Without it, we are going to struggle to make payroll next month." Zelda's mind raced. She had been managing the ranch's finances for months now, and she knew every dollar that came in and went out. What if we sold some of the horses instead? The 3-year-olds are trained enough to fetch good prices, and you have got a buyer in Dallas who has been wanting to purchase from you for months. "Those horses are not ready," Trent said, shaking his head. "They need at least another month of training." "Then we will train them harder," Zelda said firmly. "I will help. We can get them ready in 3 weeks if we work together." Trent looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "You do not have to do this. The finances are your job, not training horses." "I am part of this ranch now," Zelda said. "Your problems are my problems." "Zelda." The way he said her name made her shiver. He stepped closer, and suddenly the stable felt very small. "Do you know what I think about when I am supposed to be focusing on work?" Her mouth went dry. "What?" "You," he said simply. "I think about the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you chew your lip when you are concentrating on the ledgers, the way you look in the morning with your hair down before you pin it up." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I think about what it would be like to kiss you." "Trent," Zelda whispered, but she did not know if it was a protest or a plea. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. "Tell me this is a terrible idea, that I am your employer and you owe me a debt, and this is all kinds of wrong." "It is a terrible idea," Zelda agreed. "Completely inappropriate. So I should stop." "I did not say that." He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, as if he expected her to push him away. But Zelda had no intention of pushing him away. She had been waiting for this, wanting this, for longer than she cared to admit. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past 4 months, her hands fisting in his shirt, his arms coming around her waist to pull her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Trent rested his forehead against hers. "That was even better than I imagined," he said. "You imagined it?" Zelda asked, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "About 1,000 times." He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "I know the situation between us is complicated. I know you are here because of a debt, and that makes the power between us unequal. But Zelda, I care about you. Not as an employee, not as someone who works for me, but as a woman I am falling in love with. And if you do not feel the same way, if you want me to back off and keep things professional, I will. I promise I will, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know. Love." He had said love. Zelda's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "You are right that the situation is complicated," she said slowly. "But I would be lying if I said I did not feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or proximity or anything other than what it actually is. But Trent, I think I am falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Zelda melted into him, into the solid warmth of his body and the tenderness in his touch. "Your debt," he said when they finally came up for air. "Consider it paid. As of right now, you do not owe me anything." "What? No." Zelda shook her head firmly. "I will not have you forgiving my debt because we are involved romantically. That is not right. Zelda, you have saved me 10 times what you owed me in the last 4 months alone. The contracts you negotiated, the waste you cut, the organization you brought to the finances. This ranch is more profitable now than it has been in 5 years. You have more than earned your freedom." "Then pay me a fair wage," Zelda insisted. "Pay me what a bookkeeper is worth and let me work off the debt properly. I want this to be equal between us, Trent. I want to know that anything happening between us is because we both choose it, not because of some obligation or debt." He studied her face, and she could see the respect growing in his eyes. "All right," he agreed. "We will do it your way. Fair wage, proper accounting of the debt. But Zelda, I want you to know that you are free to leave whenever you want. If you ever want to go, I will not stop you." "What if I do not want to go?" she asked softly. "What if I want to stay not because of the debt, but because I am happy here?" "Then I would say I am the luckiest man in Texas." They trained those horses together over the next 3 weeks, working from dawn until long after dark. It was exhausting, dirty, sometimes dangerous work, but Zelda loved every minute of it. She loved watching Trent work with the animals, his patience and skill evident in every movement. She loved the way he taught her, never condescending or impatient, always encouraging. And she loved the way they moved together, anticipating each other's needs, working as a seamless team. The horses sold for even more than they had hoped, enough to not only cover payroll but also to invest in breeding stock that would improve the ranch's herd for years to come. The buyer from Dallas was so impressed with the quality of the animals that he placed an advance order for 6 more horses to be delivered the following spring. "We did it," Trent said as they watched the buyer's men load the last horse onto the transport wagon. He grabbed Zelda around the waist and spun her in a circle, both of them laughing. "You brilliant, wonderful woman, we actually did it." When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools, and Zelda did not care who was watching when she pulled him down for a kiss. Their relationship deepened as autumn gave way to winter. They were careful to maintain professionalism in front of the ranch hands, but everyone knew something had shifted between them. Maria certainly knew. She started making pointed comments about how nice it would be to have a wedding at the ranch, and how the main house was much too large for one person. "She is not subtle, is she?" Zelda said one evening as she and Trent sat on the porch of the main house, watching the stars come out. "About as subtle as a cattle stampede," Trent agreed. He had his arm around her shoulders and she was curled into his side, a blanket wrapped around them both against the December chill. "Does it bother you, the comments, I mean?" "No," Zelda said honestly. "Should it? I do not know. Some women might think it is too fast, too presumptuous." Zelda tilted her head to look up at him. "What about you? What do you think?" Trent was quiet for a moment, his hand absently rubbing her arm. "I think I knew the night we played poker that you were going to change my life. I think I have been looking for you my whole life without knowing it, and I think that when you know something is right, speed does not matter." "So what are you saying?" Zelda asked, her heart beginning to pound. "I am saying that I love you," Trent said, turning to face her fully. "I am saying that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I am saying that I want to build a life with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you." He took her hand in his. "I am saying that I do not have a ring yet, and this is probably the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals, but Zelda Calloway, will you marry me? Tears were streaming down Zelda's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Zelda knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They were married on a crisp January morning in 1879, in the small church in San Antonio with Maria and Pete, and all the ranch hands in attendance. Zelda wore a cream-colored dress that Maria had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Trent wore his best suit, his hair actually tamed for once, and he looked so handsome that Zelda's breath caught when she first saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Trent kissed her in front of everyone, Zelda felt like the luckiest woman alive. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with enough food and music and dancing to last well into the night. At one point, Trent pulled Zelda away from the festivities, leading her toward the stable. "Where are we going?" she asked, laughing as he tugged her along. "I have something for you," he said. "A wedding present." He opened the stable door and led her to a stall at the far end. Inside was the most beautiful horse Zelda had ever seen. A black stallion with a white star on his forehead, powerful and magnificent and somehow familiar. "Trent," she breathed. "Is this?" "Thunder," he confirmed. "You won him fair and square that night in the saloon, even if I won the hand. You risked everything on that game, and I have always felt like I took something from you that you earned. So he is yours now. Truly yours." Zelda stared at the horse, then at her husband, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gesture. Thunder was worth a fortune, but more than that, he was a symbol of everything Trent valued, and he was giving the horse to her. "I cannot accept this," she said. "He means too much to you." "You mean more," Trent said simply. He put his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Besides, I was thinking about what you said that night, about winning more than the horse. And you did, Zelda. You won so much more than that." "What did I win?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Me," he said. "You won my respect, my admiration, and eventually my heart. You won a home and a family and a future. You won everything I have to give." He turned her in his arms to face him. "Just like I won everything when you said yes to marrying me." She kissed him then, there in the stable with Thunder watching, and it felt like a promise. A promise of all the days to come, all the adventures they would share, all the love they would build together. Their first year of marriage was both wonderful and challenging. Zelda threw herself into running the ranch's business side with even more dedication. And under her management, the Carson Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. She negotiated contracts that other ranchers envied and caught several attempts by unscrupulous suppliers to overcharge them. Trent called her his secret weapon, and she could tell he was not entirely joking, but they also learned the harder parts of partnership. They had their first real fight in March over whether to invest in expensive breeding stock or save the money for a cushion against bad seasons. Zelda wanted to be conservative. Trent wanted to take the risk. They argued for 2 days, both stubborn, both convinced they were right. In the end, they compromised, buying half the breeding stock Trent wanted while keeping half the savings Zelda thought they needed. It was a good lesson in marriage, Zelda reflected later. Neither of them had gotten exactly what they wanted, but they had both been heard and respected. The breeding stock turned out to be a good investment. By the following spring, they had several foals that showed tremendous promise, and cattle buyers were already making offers for them sight unseen based on the bloodlines alone. "You were right," Zelda admitted one evening as they watched the foals play in the pasture. "We were both right. Trent corrected, pulling her close. That is the benefit of being a team. In July of 1880, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Trent at dinner one night, just the two of them at the big table in the main house that no longer felt too large because they filled it with love and laughter. "You are sure?" he asked, his eyes wide. "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it," Zelda said, watching his face carefully. They had talked about children, but talking and facing the reality were different things. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Trent stood so quickly his chair fell backward. He crossed to her side of the table and pulled her into his arms. "Zelda, I am over the moon. I am beyond happy. I am going to be a father." He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You are going to be a mother. We are going to be parents." "We are," Zelda agreed, and suddenly it all felt very real and slightly terrifying and absolutely perfect. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for most of the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. Trent fretted over her constantly, bringing her crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her back when the nausea got bad. Maria moved into one of the guest rooms so she could help care for Zelda, and the usually tough ranch woman turned soft and maternal, making special foods and fussing over Zelda like she was made of glass. "I am not an invalid," Zelda protested one afternoon when both Trent and Maria insisted she rest instead of working on the books. "No, but you are carrying precious cargo," Maria said firmly. "The books can wait. You need to take care of yourself and that baby." As the months passed and Zelda's belly grew, she had to admit they might have a point. She tired more easily, and her ankles swelled if she stood too long, but she also felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. She was creating a life, a new person who would be part of her and Trent, and the wonder of that never faded. Trent was impossibly tender with her during those months. He would talk to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and promises about the future. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. And he never once complained when she woke him up at odd hours because she needed pickles or could not get comfortable or just wanted him to hold her. "I love you," she told him one night in February of 1881, as they lay in bed with his hand resting on her very pregnant belly. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I know the feeling," Trent said softly. "Sometimes I look at you and I cannot believe this is my life. That you are my wife, that we are about to have a baby. It feels too good to be real." "It is real," Zelda assured him. "This is our life. We earned it." Their son was born on a warm March evening, arriving in a rush after hours of difficult labor. Trent stayed with Zelda the whole time despite the midwife's insistence that men should wait elsewhere. He held her hand and whispered encouragement, and let her squeeze his hand hard enough to leave bruises. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and red-faced and perfect, the midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Zelda's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and his shock of dark hair so much like Trent's, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one, we have been waiting for you." Trent was crying, she realized, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their son. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Zelda, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Trent's father, with the middle name of James after Zelda's father. Thomas James Carson, and he was the most loved baby in all of Texas. The early months of parenthood were exhausting. Thomas was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and seemed to prefer being held constantly. Zelda and Trent took turns walking him at night, pacing the floor while singing lullabies and making shushing sounds. They were both perpetually tired, operating on a few stolen hours of sleep here and there. But even in the exhaustion, there was joy. The first time Thomas smiled at Zelda, she burst into tears. The first time he reached for Trent, grabbing his father's finger in his tiny fist, Trent looked at Zelda with such wonder that she fell in love with him all over again. They figured out parenthood together, learning as they went. Zelda continued to manage the ranch's finances, now from home with Thomas in a basket beside her desk. Trent cut back on some of his longer trips, not wanting to be away from his family for too long. They became skilled at working together while one of them held the baby, passing Thomas back and forth as needed. "We make a good team," Trent observed one afternoon as they successfully managed to review a contract, feed Thomas, and deal with a dispute between two ranch hands, all within the space of an hour. "The best team," Zelda agreed, bouncing Thomas on her hip. "Though I will be honest, I am looking forward to when he sleeps through the night." That happened eventually, though it took longer than either of them would have preferred. But by the time Thomas was a year old, he had settled into a routine that worked for the whole family. He was a bright, curious child, always getting into things, and Zelda could already see both her stubbornness and Trent's determination in his personality. "We are in trouble when he gets older," she said one evening, watching as Thomas determinedly tried to pull himself up on the furniture despite falling down repeatedly. "We are in big trouble," Trent agreed, but he was smiling. "But we will handle it. We can handle anything as long as we are together." The ranch continued to prosper over the next few years. Word spread about the quality of Carson horses and cattle, and they had buyers coming from as far away as California. Zelda's financial management meant they weathered the inevitable bad seasons without disaster, and Trent's skill with animals meant their livestock was always in demand. They added more land to the ranch, expanding their operation. They built a new barn and hired more hands. They became pillars of the San Antonio community, known for their fair dealing and their generosity. When there was a drought and many smaller ranchers struggled, Trent and Zelda offered employment and support without hesitation. When the church needed a new roof, they donated the funds. When a widow needed help, they were there. "Your father would be proud of the man you have become," Zelda told Trent one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch, Thomas playing at their feet. "Our fathers would both be proud," Trent corrected. "Look what we built together, Zelda. Not just the ranch, but our whole life, our family. I could not have done any of this without you." "We did it together," Zelda said, echoing his words from years before. "That is what marriage is, partnership." In the spring of 1884, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She was not as sick, and though she still tired easily, she felt more confident in her ability to handle both the pregnancy and her responsibilities. Their daughter was born in November, arriving quickly and without the drama of Thomas's birth. She had Zelda's auburn hair and green eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. They named her Rose after Trent's sister, and she was as different from Thomas as could be. Where he had been fussy, she was calm. Where he had resisted sleep, she dozed contentedly. She was an easy baby, and Zelda was grateful for it because Thomas, now 3 years old, required constant supervision to keep him from climbing everything or trying to ride horses that were far too big for him. "He has no fear," Trent said one afternoon, pulling Thomas down from a fence he had climbed. "He gets that from you," Zelda pointed out. "I seem to remember someone telling me about how you tried to break a wild Mustang when you were 7. That is different. I was practically grown." "You were 7. Like I said, practically grown." Zelda just laughed and bounced Rose in her arms, watching her husband wrestle playfully with their son. This was her life now, and it was so far from that desperate night in the saloon when she had bet everything on a hand of cards. She had thought she was gambling for money, for survival. But she had actually been gambling for this, for everything she had ever wanted without knowing it. That evening, after the children were in bed, Trent found Zelda in the office going over the quarterly reports. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with that soft expression he sometimes got when he thought she was not paying attention. "What?" she asked, looking up from the ledger. "I was just thinking about the night we met," Trent said, crossing the room to sit on the edge of her desk. "About how you walked into that saloon and changed my entire world." "I walked in and lost everything," Zelda corrected. "Did you?" Trent reached out and took her hand. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you won everything. A home, a family, a partnership, love." Zelda set down her pen and stood, moving to stand between his knees. "Do you remember what you said to me that night, after I laid down my cards? I said a lot of things that night. You said I won more than the horse." Zelda put her arms around his neck. "You were right. I won so much more. I won you. I won this life. I won every dream I never let myself have because I thought they were impossible." "Not impossible," Trent said, pulling her close. "Just waiting for the right moment, the right hand of cards." "The right gamble," Zelda agreed. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and even after years of marriage it still made her heart race. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For taking a chance that night, for coming to the ranch, for staying. For building this life with me, for giving me Thomas and Rose and everything else, for being exactly who you are." He pulled back to look at her. "I know it started as a debt, but Zelda, you have given me far more than I could ever repay." "Then I suppose we are even," Zelda said, her eyes shining with tears. "Because you gave me the same." The years continued to pass in a blur of activity and love. Thomas grew into a confident boy who could ride almost as well as his father by the time he was 7. He had inherited Trent's way with horses and Zelda's quick mind for numbers. Rose was quieter but equally determined, and she showed an early talent for drawing that led to her spending hours sketching the ranch animals and the landscape. In 1887, Zelda gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Matthew and Mark. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth was touch and go for a while, scary enough that Trent had paced the hallway outside their room until the doctor came out and assured him that Zelda and both babies were healthy. 4 children, Trent said that night, looking at the 2 tiny babies sleeping in their bassinets while Zelda rested in bed. "We have 4 children, Zelda." "I know. I was there," she said tiredly, but she was smiling. "Are you overwhelmed, terrified?" he admitted. "But also the happiest I have ever been." The twins were a handful, as twins often are. They were mischievous and adventurous, always getting into something. They learned to walk early and immediately used that skill to escape any attempt to contain them. By the time they were 2, Zelda was convinced they had aged her 10 years. But they also brought tremendous joy to the family. Thomas and Rose doted on their younger brothers, and the ranch hands all pitched in to help watch the boys when their penchant for adventure got to be too much. It took a village, Zelda reflected, but thankfully they had built a good village. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They bought out a neighboring property when the owner retired, adding another 1,000 acres to their holdings. They started breeding quarter horses in addition to their cattle operation. And those horses became famous throughout the Southwest for their speed and intelligence. Zelda had long since paid off her original poker debt, but she continued to manage the ranch's finances and business dealings. She had a sharp eye for opportunities, and an even sharper eye for anyone trying to cheat them. Trent called her his fiercest protector, and he was not wrong. In 1891, when Thomas was 10 and starting to take a real interest in the ranch operations, Trent began teaching him how to manage cattle and work with the hands. Zelda, meanwhile, started teaching him bookkeeping and business principles. They wanted their children to understand all aspects of the ranch so they could make informed decisions when they were older. "You think he will want to stay?" Trent asked one night as they watched Thomas working with one of the young horses. "Or will he want to go off and find his own way?" "I think we raise him to have choices," Zelda said. "We give him the skills to succeed at anything he wants to do, and then we trust him to choose wisely." "When did you get so smart?" "I married you, did I not? That shows excellent judgment." Trent laughed and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. They stood together in the evening light, watching their son work, and Zelda felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had gambled for all those years ago, even if she had not known it. This peace, this love, this sense of purpose and belonging. The poker game that had started it all felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. That desperate young woman who had walked into a saloon with nothing to her name seemed like a stranger now. Zelda had built herself into someone stronger, someone more confident, someone who knew her own worth. But she never forgot where she had come from or the lessons she had learned. She taught her children to play cards, to calculate odds, to read people and situations. But she also taught them that the biggest gambles in life were not about money or possessions. The biggest gambles were about trust and love and faith in yourself and others. "Your mother won me in a poker game," Trent told Thomas one day when the boy asked how they had met. "Really?" Thomas's eyes went wide. "She won you?" "Well, technically I won the hand," Trent admitted, "but looking back, I think she won everything that mattered." Thomas thought about this. "Does that mean I can gamble for a wife when I get older?" "Absolutely not," Zelda said firmly, coming up behind them. "You will court a nice girl properly and win her heart the old-fashioned way." "But you did not do that," Thomas pointed out with the impeccable logic of a 10-year-old. "Do as I say, not as I did," Zelda said, but she was smiling. "Besides, our story is unique. Most people do not win their true love in a poker game." "Did you know Dad was your true love when you won him?" Thomas asked. Zelda glanced at Trent, who was watching her with that soft expression she loved. "No," she said honestly. "I did not know anything except that I was in trouble and trying to survive. But sometimes the things we need most find us when we least expect them." "That is confusing," Thomas said. "Love is often confusing," Trent told his son, "but it is always worth it." In 1895, when Rose was 11, she announced that she wanted to go to school in San Antonio to study art. It was a difficult decision for Zelda and Trent. They had tutored their children at home, with Zelda teaching literature and mathematics, while Trent handled history and science. The ranch had been their whole world, but Rose had talent, real talent, and she deserved the chance to develop it properly. "We let her go," Zelda said, even though her heart was breaking at the thought. "We give her wings and trust she will come back to us." Rose did go, living with a respectable family in town during the school year and coming home every weekend and all summer. She thrived in the new environment, her art improving dramatically under proper instruction. And she did come back, every chance she got, because the ranch was still her home and her family was still her heart. The twins grew into strapping young men, both of them taller than their father by the time they were 16. Matthew wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine and healing. Mark wanted to be a rancher like his father, already showing a natural gift for managing land and livestock. "We did good," Trent said one evening in 1899, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual over the years. this quiet time together at the end of each day. Thomas was 20 now, working full-time on the ranch and courting a nice girl from town. Rose was 15 and flourishing in her studies. The twins were 12 and still getting into trouble but good boys at heart. "We did," Zelda agreed, leaning into her husband's side. They were both in their 40s now, no longer young but not yet old. Trent had gray at his temples and lines around his eyes. Zelda had silver threads in her auburn hair and hands roughened by years of work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that night in the saloon when everything had changed. "You ever regret it?" Trent asked quietly. "The poker game, I mean. The way we started." "Never," Zelda said firmly. "Not for a single moment, do you?" "My only regret is that I did not kiss you sooner," Trent said. "I wasted 4 months being noble and professional when I could have been kissing you." "You are making up for it now," Zelda assured him, and she was not wrong. Even after nearly 20 years of marriage, Trent still kissed her every morning before he left for work and every evening when he came home. He still reached for her hand when they walked. He still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. In the spring of 1901, Thomas married his sweetheart, a lovely young woman named Catherine who fit into the family perfectly. They had a big wedding at the ranch, with half of San Antonio in attendance. Watching her son pledge his life to another person, Zelda cried happy tears and held tightly to Trent's hand. "That was us once," she whispered. "That is still us," Trent whispered back. "Every single day." Thomas and Catherine moved into one of the houses on the property, a cottage that Trent had built for them as a wedding present. Within a year, they had given Zelda and Trent their first grandchild, a little girl they named Zelda after her grandmother. Holding her namesake for the first time, Zelda was overwhelmed with emotion. This tiny person was the result of the choice she had made all those years ago. If she had not walked into that saloon, if she had not sat down at that poker table, if she had not taken that enormous gamble, this child would not exist. None of this would exist. "What are you thinking?" Trent asked, watching her cradle their granddaughter. "I am thinking about fate," Zelda said. "About how one decision can change everything, how one night can set in motion a chain of events that leads to this." She looked up at him. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that I was brave enough to take that chance." "I am grateful you were brave enough too," Trent said. "Every single day, I wake up grateful." The years continued to pass, bringing change and growth. Rose returned from her studies as an accomplished artist and opened a gallery in San Antonio while still maintaining her room at the ranch. Matthew went off to veterinary school back east, the first Carson to attend university. Mark stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and brother to manage the ever-expanding operation. The twins fell in love with sisters, which amused everyone, and got married in a double ceremony that had the whole county talking. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with the sound of children's laughter once again. Zelda and Trent moved into their 50s and then their 60s, their hair going gray, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They had built an empire together, but more importantly, they had built a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Trent took Zelda back to the saloon where they had met. It was under new ownership now, cleaner and more respectable than it had been in 1878, but it was still recognizable. "Why are we here?" Zelda asked, confused. Trent led her to the same table where they had played all those years ago. He pulled out a chair for her, and when she sat down, he sat across from her and pulled out a deck of cards. "One more hand," he said, "for old time's sake." "What are we playing for?" Zelda asked, amused. "How about this?" Trent reached into his pocket and pulled out a deed. The entire Carson ranch. I am betting it all on one hand of poker. Trent, that is insane. Half that ranch is mine anyway, I know, but I am a gambling man. He dealt the cards with practiced ease. Are you in? Zelda looked at her cards, then at her husband. He was 62 years old now, with more gray than brown in his hair and deep lines etched by years of sun and laughter. But his eyes were still that same amber whiskey color, and when he looked at her, she still felt like she was 22 and taking the biggest gamble of her life. I am in, she said. They played the hand slowly, savoring it. Zelda won with three of a kind, beating Trent's two pair. He laid down his cards with a dramatic sigh. I am ruined, he said. You have won everything. I won everything 30 years ago, Zelda corrected, standing and moving around the table to sit in his lap, propriety be damned. I won it the night you looked at me across this table and saw not a desperate woman but a worthy opponent. I won it every day after when you treated me as an equal. I won it when you gave me your heart. Trent wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. You know what I said that night? After the game, you said a lot of things. I said you won more than that tonight. He pulled back to look at her. I was not talking about the horse, Zelda. I was talking about me. You won me that night, and I have been yours ever since. I know, Zelda said softly. I have always known. They kissed there in the old saloon. Two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other, and it felt like coming full circle. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the next generation. Thomas proved to be as skilled as his father at running the operation, and with Catherine's business sense to complement his ranching knowledge, they took the Carson Ranch to new heights. They modernized operations, introduced new breeding techniques, and expanded into new markets. Zelda and Trent stepped back gradually, transitioning from active management to advisory roles. They spent their days working with the grandchildren, who ranged in age from babies to teenagers. Zelda taught them to play poker, to read people, to think strategically. Trent taught them to ride, to respect the land and the animals, to work hard and deal fairly. On summer evenings, the whole family would gather on the big porch of the main house, 3 generations eating together and sharing stories. Zelda would look around at her children and grandchildren, at the ranch spreading out around them, and feel a deep sense of peace. Tell us about how you and Grandpa met, one of the younger grandchildren would invariably ask. And Zelda would tell the story once more, about walking into a saloon with nothing to her name, about a poker game that changed everything, about a cowboy who had looked at her and seen something worth keeping. So Grandma won Grandpa's horse, the children would ask. She won a lot more than that, Trent would always add, pulling Zelda close. She won my heart. In the winter of 1912, when Zelda was 66 and Trent was 70, they took a trip to the coast, something they had always talked about but never done. They spent a week in a small hotel overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, walking on the beach and watching the waves. You remember what you said when I asked you to marry me? Trent asked one evening as they sat on the sand watching the sunset. You asked if this was real, Zelda said. If our life was real or too good to be true. And you said it was real, that we earned it. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. You were right. Every day of happiness, every moment of joy, we earned it by choosing each other, by working together, by never giving up on us. We did earn it, Zelda agreed. And Trent, I would do it all again. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of doubt, I would do it all again to end up here with you. Even the poker game, losing everything and ending up in debt to a stranger. Especially the poker game, Zelda said firmly. Because that was the night everything began. That was the night I found you. They stayed at the coast for another few days, then returned home to the ranch and their family. Life continued in its rhythm, seasons passing, grandchildren growing, the ranch evolving with the times. Trent's health began to fail in 1915. It was nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for 73 years. He tired more easily, moved more slowly. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Zelda never wavered. On a quiet evening in May of that year, with Zelda sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Trent looked at his wife and smiled. "You know what the best hand I ever played was?" he asked, his voice weak but clear. "What?" Zelda asked, though tears were already streaming down her face because she knew why he was asking, knew what was coming. "The one where I lost to you," Trent said. "The one that brought you into my life. That was the best hand I ever played, even though I lost." "You did not lose," Zelda insisted, gripping his hand tightly. "We both won." "We did," Trent agreed. "We won everything." He reached up with his free hand, cupping her cheek. "I love you, Zelda Carson. I have loved you from that first night in the saloon, and I will love you beyond this life." "I love you too," Zelda whispered. "Always." Trent closed his eyes then, and with his family gathered around him and Zelda holding his hand, he slipped away peacefully, a man who had lived a full life and loved deeply. The grief was enormous, overwhelming. Zelda had lost half of herself, the partner who had made everything possible. She mourned deeply, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who held her together when she thought she might break apart completely. But even in the grief, there was gratitude. Gratitude for 36 years of marriage, for 4 children and 11 grandchildren, for a life built together through love and hard work. Gratitude for every morning they had woken up together, every evening they had watched the sunset, every moment they had shared. Zelda lived for another 7 years after Trent's death, staying active in ranch management and spending time with her growing family. She taught her great-grandchildren to play poker, passing on the skills that had changed her life. She told stories about Trent, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as long. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch where she and Trent had spent so many hours together, and she would feel his presence beside her. In those moments, it was easy to remember that long-ago night in the saloon, when a desperate young woman had taken the biggest gamble of her life and won everything she had never known to wish for. In the spring of 1922, Zelda died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. Her children buried her next to Trent in the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire county came to pay their respects to a woman who had become a legend, not just for her business acumen or her skill at cards, but for the way she had loved and been loved. The Carson Ranch continued to prosper under the management of subsequent generations, each one adding their own innovations while maintaining the core values that Zelda and Trent had established. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And in a place of honor in the ranch house, mounted on the wall, was a framed playing card, the Queen of Hearts. Below it was a small plaque that read, "In memory of the poker game that started it all, 1878, because that was what it had been in the end. One poker game, one enormous gamble, one night when a woman with nothing had risked everything and won more than she had ever dreamed possible. She had won a partnership, a family, a legacy. She had won love that lasted beyond a lifetime. She had won his best horse that night, true enough. But more importantly, she had won his respect, his trust, his heart. And in winning those things, she had won everything that mattered." The story ended there, in that small family cemetery on a hill in Texas, where 2 people who had found each other against all odds rested side by side for eternity. But the love they had built, the family they had created, the lessons they had taught, continued on, generation after generation. Proof that sometimes the biggest gambles lead to the greatest rewards.